This is a Channel 7 Eyewitness News special event. Vote 09, the official general election debate for New York City Comptroller, administered by the New York City Campaign Finance Board and sponsored by WABC-TV, Univision, and the League of Women Voters of New York City. Now from Channel 7 Studios, your moderator, Eyewitness News anchor, Diana Williams.
And hello, everyone, and welcome to the official general election debate for New York City Comptroller. Our candidates today are Democrat John Liu, and from the Rent is to High Party, Salim Ijaz. Now, we want you to know that there are other candidates on the ballot for Comptroller, but they did not meet the Campaign Finance Board's financial criteria to participate in this debate. Joining me in the studio to question the candidates are Eyewitness News political reporter Dave Evans and WXTV reporter with Noticias Univision 41, Mariela Salgado. This debate is administered by the New York City Campaign Finance Board. The CFB is a nonpartisan, independent city agency that oversees the campaign finance program, which amplifies the impact of New Yorkers' small contributions by matching them with public funds. Eligible candidates who join the program are required to take part in today's debate. The CFB also provides public disclosure of campaign finances, enforces the city's Campaign Finance Act, and offers voters important information about candidates for city office through the New York City Voter Guide. And you will find that guide in your mailbox before Election Day and also on the CFB website, which is www.nyccfb.info. And now we want to tell you a bit about the job of the New York City Comptroller. The Comptroller is the city's chief financial officer. He has a salary of $185,000 a year. The Comptroller is often called the fiscal watchdog with power to audit city agencies. Most importantly, though, the Comptroller manages the city's pension funds valued at more than $80 billion. So we want to get started. The order that the candidates appear on stage and the order that they answer questions was determined by random drawing. They will each get 60 seconds to answer the questions. And of course, as always, we urge the candidates to stick to the time. We've got an hour here, so I'm sure that they will. So we want to begin our questioning. We're going to start with pensions, and our first question comes from Dave Evans, and it goes to Mr. Liu. Dave?
Thank you, Diana. Mr. Liu, let's start with, since 2003, as you know, the amount of money that taxpayers have had to put into the public pension funds has tripled. It's now about $6.5 billion a year. And as you know, this amount of money is going to keep going up and up and up in future years. How do you plan on controlling these runaway pension costs? And also, do you think the unions perhaps got a sweetheart deal for these large payouts coming on down the line?
Well, thank you very much, Dave, for the question, and I want to thank you and Mariela for joining us once again, and thank you, Diana. I'm very happy to have this opportunity to discuss these important issues with my opponent, Mr. Ijaz. This is a very important question that is going to face the taxpayers of this city in the years to come. And the fact is that pension costs have risen significantly over the years, and so we need to undertake a host of strategies to rein in these costs. First and foremost, I will use my professional background in pensions, in finance, to invest the pension portfolio in a manner that produces better risk-adjusted rates of return, going back to a more traditional portfolio, one that is simpler to manage and therefore more cost-efficient. Saving management expenses, say, from 3% down to 1%, that would be a 2% savings, and in this case, in the case of pension investments, 2% saved certainly would be 2% earned. There are a number of other issues that I will certainly address in the hour to come.
Mr. Ijaz, how would you help taxpayers?
Yes, indeed. I'm glad you asked the question. Here is one of those classic situations where we have the entrenched establishment with incompetent officials running the government. In the last 2 years alone, the pension funds lost $30 billion. It's a gigantic amount. And what happened? All the fund managers were getting hundreds of millions of dollars of fees. Nobody changed the situation. They're still taking hundreds of millions of dollars of fees. And where is the rap going to be? On the poor workers. Go sock it to them. Don't give them any more money. Try and get whatever they're getting from them, while all these millionaires, the very rich people, keep getting dollars, billions of dollars of the city's finances.
Okay, I know we're going to be talking more about placement agents and these money managers and those fees and everything, but I'm curious, do either of you support the kind of two-tier pension system that the governor's been talking about in his new budget?
Well, there have been talks of new pension tiers, and as I've stated throughout the year during my campaign, I do support having everybody sit down at the negotiating table through collective bargaining to figure out how best to rein in these costs over the long term. I don't support using rhetoric in the short term to saying that, well, we need to impose a new pension tier such as Tier 5 in order to bridge a $5 billion budget deficit that our city is facing in the next 9 months. That is rhetoric. Nonetheless, I do support having everybody sit down through the collective bargaining process to bring these costs under control.
Mr. Ajaz, what do you say about a two-tier pension plan?
Again, talking of cost savings, the first thing we should do is to cut the pension costs. All the fund managers should be done away with. Hundreds of millions of dollars every year go to them. Please bring employ a pool of talent within the pension funds. You will save hundreds of millions of dollars right away there. You do not have to go after the poor working class, the hardworking city employees, and try and reduce their benefits.
Okay. Mariela now has a question, and it does deal with these placement managers. So, Mariela?
Thank you, Diana. Buenos días a ambos candidatos. Good morning, good morning actually to you both. This has to do with Mr. Ijas. The Daily News reported that current Comptroller Bill Thompson received more than $158,000. This was from donations, campaign donations from placement agents who won more than $2 billion doing business with the city. Do you think Mr. Thompson made a mistake, and will you vow not to do this?
Absolutely. The way the system is structured, it is extremely unfair to the general public, to the working class. You have elected officials accepting it's a legal bribe. When they accept contributions from the people who want to do business with the city, that's a legal bribe. How can you be in a responsible position like that, where this is the sacred trust of the workers. This is their way they will support themselves. This is their livelihood. Do not please play with the pension funds of the people. It is their sweat and blood. It is their hard-earned dollars. I absolutely do not agree and deplore any contribution acceptance by the elected officials. It is, as I said, a legal bribe.
Mr. Liu?
Comptroller Thompson has made it very clear that he does not single-handedly control where the investment's going, and in fact, the investment decisions are made by the respective boards of the 5 pension funds, 4 of which are actually controlled by the mayor. Nonetheless, as I have pledged during my entire campaign, I will get rid of the pay-to-play politics. I don't think there's any place for that. I've pledged that I would ban any kind of political contribution from people doing business with the Comptroller's office under my administration.
Should the question for you, and really for you both, I mean, should the mayor, should the Comptroller's office have more control about where these monies are going?
Well, that's certainly a debate that's taking place at the state level, where we have a different system at the state level than in the city level. In the state level, you have really a sole trustee in the Comptroller. The Comptroller has the unilateral power to make all decisions with regard to where the investments are placed. Not so at the city level, and I think the city level affords a better system of checks and balances, and I would support continuing the city system where it's not the Comptroller who has the unilateral decision-making power to decide where the investments would be made, but actually all these decisions have to be approved by the respective boards.
Mr. Ajaj, you seem to be nodding your head to that. What do you think?
Yes, absolutely. But I would rather strengthen the controls, because you know what is happening all around. We know what happened during Mr. Havasi's time. Millions of dollars were taken by his political appointees and the middlemen. This is despicable. In the state, a fund lost a lot of money and still got $50 million. We have lost $30 billion, and they're still getting hundreds of millions of dollars. We need better controls. That is absolutely important.
Okay. I have the next question, and it's for you, Mr. Liu. Daily News reported that you took nearly $9,000 since 2006 from people at pension management firms, but you returned, about over half of that. Have you returned the rest of the money?
We are certainly reviewing anything that would seem untoward, and to the extent that there would be a possible conflict of interest, I've returned these contributions These contributions were also made, many of them significantly long ago. And so once again, we're reviewing every single contribution. But out of the more than $3 million that I'm proud to have raised for my campaign over the last couple of years, last few years, this represents a very small amount, but nonetheless, I pledge to make sure that there are no potential conflicts of interest.
Okay. I know that was directed specifically to Mr. Liu, but Mr. Ajaj, I'll give you some time here.
I have no contribution ever received from any special interest group, nor will I ever take it. I'm not a machine man. No one will come to me. I'm not part of the, I'm not subservient to any special interest group, neither do I work for the political machine.
Okay. Our next question comes from Dave, and it is for Mr. Ajaj. Dave?
Mr. Ijaz, as you know, an audit firm recently found that 4 out of the 5 city pension funds did not perform as well as other similarly sized pension funds around the country. If you were the city controller, how would you invest the city's $80 billion pension? And a little bit of a caveat here, if you could explain a little bit more than reining in and cleaning up what you've talked about a lot here, which is all the money that has gone to different money managers. More so than that, how would you invest the city's $80 billion pension fund?
Absolutely, and I'm glad you raised this question. Look, when the stock market was tanking, they weren't talking of the Dow Jones stopping at 8,000. They were forecasting that it'll go down to 6,000. Do you know what would have happened to the capital? If at where it stood at 8,000, the pension funds lost $30+ billion. Imagine if it had continued. There was no strategy in place to ensure that if in case of such a catastrophic economic environment, the capital would be preserved. The safest and the soundest strategies should have been implemented, keeping in mind that it's a sacred trust. Every penny that's there, it belongs to the workers. You cannot play around with it. It has to be in the safest and the soundest places.
What do you think the safest and the soundest
Okay,
method
in
is?
hindsight, obviously, if you put it in bonds, you would be okay. They did not go down that much. But obviously, you have to have a proper mix. And the perfect strategy would have been to make sure that if a proper risk analysis had been done, they would have known what would have happened if the market goes down to 8,000 or 6,000. And accordingly, you make the adjustment.
I'm curious, where are you investing your own money right now?
No, it's in the stock market partially, but I'm mostly in the bonds.
So mostly bonds. Okay. So, Mr. Liu, we'd like some specifics from you, maybe more than we just got there, of where exactly you would invest.
Yeah, I've talked about, again, returning to a portfolio that is more easily understood by the public as well, something that relies less on esoteric financial instruments, which in many cases led to the collapse of the financial sector here in New York and across the country in the first place. And I've talked about rebalancing the portfolio so that it goes back to the stated goal of 70% invested in equities as opposed to 30% being invested in fixed incomes, bonds. Right now, because of the stock market collapse, it's gone down. The mix has changed to something of a 60% stock, 40% bond ratio. We need to rebalance to get back to the original objective as set by the boards. And again, lesser reliance on difficult to understand financial instruments. Some of the hedge funds out there, some of the newfangled instruments that pension funds have been invested in recent years have not produced the supposedly superior risk-adjusted rates of return that they were supposed to. Let's go back to the basics, and along the way, as I said before, we can also reduce the amount of fees, the expense ratios that some of these very complicated investment portfolios sometimes necessitates. Again, we save on the management fees. That is a direct return to the pensioners.
Do you follow that same kind of system with your own personal portfolio?
No, I have a very different portfolio for myself. I am almost 100% invested in equities, and that's because my lifetime and my period of time towards retirement is far longer than the average in the portfolio in the pension plans.
Okay. Our next question is from Mariela, and it goes to Mr. Liu. Mariela?
Mr. Liu, during the primary race, a daily news report contradicted your account of working at a sweatshop with your mother as a child. Please set the record straight, especially because this goes directly to the immigrant community. They can relate to a story like that. And we would like to have your straight answer on that.
Absolutely. I'm proud to be an immigrant New Yorker. I immigrated from Taiwan at the age of 5 years old. People still like to say that I was made in Taiwan. I'm very proud of that as well. And when we got here, my parents, they came over here because they wanted their kids, me and my 2 younger brothers, to grow up American. And they started with nothing here. My dad worked all the time. My mom also had to go to work, and the only thing she could find, Mariella, was a job in a garment factory. And when I was 7 years old, I got my first job working in the same factory, learning firsthand why they call that place a sweatshop. Notwithstanding any news accounts that came out, the fact is my mother set the record very clearly, that she stood up with me at a rally that had actually been planned months ago and talked about how she did bring me and my brothers to the factory, and we all worked, we all got paid by the piece. And the fact of the matter is, I've talked about how this is a difficult experience, but it's not something that's special to me and my family. It's something that millions of New Yorkers now and also in the past have gone through. This is what makes New York City great.
But Mr. Liu, do you have any regrets including that story in your campaign? Do you think it's had a negative effect within the Hispanic or immigrant community in general?
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, I've told my story because I believe that my story is highly relevant to me serving as a public official, certainly in the office of Comptroller, where I do believe this is a position that is critical to maintaining not only the quality of life, but providing equal economic opportunities to all New Yorkers, and certainly immigrants, where a lot of times the immigrants have not had the same kind of access to the jobs and the small business opportunities. So I will continue to talk about that.
Mr. Josh, I want to give you an opportunity to comment here. I'm sure you saw all of the coverage.
Yes, indeed. You know, it was rather curious. To obtain the sympathy of working class, John came up with the sob story. Geez, 7-year-old working in a sweatshop. His father comes and refutes it. So I don't know who's telling the truth. His father, who's an honorable man, a top banker, and I'll leave it to John to decide. Well, the important thing here is that sympathies of the working class, it can be arrived by actions. There was $1 billion shortfall. What did they do? All these people got together and crammed $1 billion tax on the poor and the working class. They all stood there and watched the taxes going down their throat. When the poor and working class are unemployed, 10% unemployment, underemployed, getting $30,000, $40,000, were better alternatives. Under my watch, not a penny of those taxes will be raised. Not a penny.
Mr. Liu, do you want to respond?
I think Mr. Ijaz is repeating Mayor Bloomberg's pledge of no new taxes.
Okay, but I want to ask you, do you think that, the campaign commercial that you ran exaggerated your childhood and your work in a sweatshop?
My campaign commercials talked about my background, my professional qualifications, and also what I've done in the city council. All of that is stuff that I'm very proud of, and I projected that to New Yorkers in the best way possible so that I could get the message, again, not only of the issues, but my qualifications for the Office of Comptroller, which again will be more critical than ever in the years to come as we face a very difficult economic climate.
Okay. Mr. Jaz, I've got a question for you here, and this is really about your personal history too. You moved back to New York City just this year from Long Island, so I think a lot of people probably wonder, how well do you really know New York City when you've been on Long Island?
Yes, indeed. In the 70s, when I came to this great city, it was Queens that we settled in. We were there for many years. And now that I was near the retirement age, my wife and I decided that's the place where we would like to go back and settle in. Flushing is our area of choice. That's his hometown too. So we were planning that I would first go in, and then this opportunity arose. So I took we would not move there, and that's where we are. The important thing is, wherever you are, what you need is someone who's committed to the working class, to the hardworking people of the city, to hundreds of thousands of the city workers, who it's their sweat and blood. It's on their backs that this great city is made. We want to make sure that every penny of theirs is well protected, and their tax dollars are well protected, and they're not overtaxed, and they're not overburdened. Enough is enough.
Mr. Liu?
I want to thank Mr. Ijaz for moving back to the city. It's not the typical retirement plan, but nonetheless, if people want to come back to the city, people want to come back to Flushing, I think it will make our city and our town even greater.
Okay. Our next question from Dave Evans, and Dave, it's directed to Mr. Liu.
Mr. Liu, a new city law or a new state law allows the city controller to go ahead and have audit power over the Department of Education and its $20 billion budget. Do you feel that there is enough oversight as it stands now with the DOE?
Well, there is more oversight now with the new system of school governance passed by the state legislature this past summer. I did always feel, as a member of the Education Committee in the City Council, that the Department of Education often simply did not regard any requests for information seriously, either from the public or from elected officials, and that had to change. The fact of the matter is that the Department of Education, under the previous system of mayoral control, was too much about, say, a mayoral dictatorship without any accountability, as opposed to mayoral control assuming the full responsibility for what was happening in the schools. Under the new school governance system, I'm much more happy with the way things are in the school system. I think that there is a stronger sense of accountability. For example, the fact that the Comptroller now has the power to approve the contracts at the Department of Education will be a vast sea change from what it was the last 7 or so years, where the Department of Education continued to put out no-bid contracts, thus wasting money and taking money away from classrooms.
Well, you can also look at the statistics that the mayor's office now provides for the Department of Education. Since you were on the committee, the Education Committee for the City Council,
yes, you
had a chance to look at all these rising test scores that the mayor brags about all the time. Do you agree with them and think that the schools have improved that significantly?
I'm very skeptical about that. I think that there are some ways schools have improved, but certainly that is not indicated by the rising test scores. And in fact, if you look at reports published about 2 years ago, and also reports that just came out this past week, there is some significant evidence that national test scores have not risen in the same way that state test scores have, even though both national and state tests are intended to gauge educational progress. That divergence in test scores from the national and between the national and the state's tests indicates that there is more coaching for the state tests and not coaching at the federal level.
Mr. Josh?
Yes, you know, again, it's very regretful that the mayor took the control of the Board of Ed. In some ways, did a good job, and others not. But I'm talking about the financial controls. They were horrendous. Thompson himself issued a report some months ago talking about the no-bid contracts. My question is, were they sleeping for years when those no-bid contracts for hundreds of millions of dollars were issued? Didn't the Comptroller put a specific control in there to ensure that they were all no-bid contracts were reported to him, and he could have ensured that there were no over expenditures? After years, such a report is issued. Where were they? Why isn't the system such that the Comptroller is aware of these huge money being spent? Where was everybody? Where was the mayor's office, the budget office? Why weren't they monitoring them?
Okay, and the other follow-up question that Dave asked was also about the state tests, or the city test scores, rather. Do you think that they are valid, that they reflect how students are doing?
Of course, when you get the grades, it is one measure. But there have been criticism as to whether the grades by themselves tell you, like Thompson says, whether the student learned or they were just learning to improve their grades. You know, for an outsider, it's tough to answer those questions when you have two of these people with opposing sides, each defending their action. My thing is, the system, as John Liu said, is better than it was before, and improvements should be made as we go along.
Okay, I want to take a moment here and take you back to grade school, high school specifically. Both of you took math. What was your lowest math score? Mr. Liu, what was yours? Your math grade, I should say. What was your lowest math grade? And then I'll ask you your highest, too.
In high school, I was a proud graduate of the Bronx High School of Science. Anything less than 95 was embarrassing.
Okay. Mr. Jha?
Well, I
How'd
always
you
did.
do in math in high school?
I did extremely well. I was one of the top students.
Okay, so you both did very well in math. Okay, good. Just thought
I was
we'd
a proud
ask.
member of the math team.
And you were
Not
on the
to
math
sound
team?
too geeky here.
Mr. Josh, were you on the math team?
No,
No?
in my school we didn't have that kind of facility. I studied in Pakistan, but we had a good education system, and I'm very proud of it.
Okay, good. Just wanted to check on that. Our next question is from Mariela to Mr. Jaj.
Thank you, Diana. Since that you're both very good with numbers, maybe Mr. Ijaz, you can tell us, how we can fix one of these biggest problems. As you know, New York always deals with the high rent. It's a big issue. Let's listen to one of our voters from Washington Heights in Spanish. Let's listen to see what she has to say.
Mi pregunta es,
We need affordable rents. We are having a difficult time with high rents in this city. What is your plan for affordable housing?
Mr. Ijaz, you belong to the rent is too high party. So what would be your plan to help people like Clara Rosa?
Absolutely, it's a great question, and thank you for asking it. Look, there's no question that the city in the past over a decade has been controlled by special interest groups. Billions of dollars given by the city to facilitate building of luxury apartment buildings. Those billions didn't go to build affordable housing. People did not even realize that the bang for the buck is much greater when you build affordable housing. You get 3 or 4 more houses instead of one luxury apartment building. You have working class there. You have people who are the backbone of the society. They're the people whose sweat and blood builds the city. You've got to make sure that they are provided affordable housing. During my campaign, I walked around in Brooklyn. I went to one of the volunteers' house. 3 flights up, an old man, retired guy, he had to go 3 flights up, one small cubicle, $1,200 a month, and he was weeping. This is not good. It should be fixed, has to be fixed now, and it will not happen under my watch.
Mr. Liu, rents?
The lack of affordable housing in this city is really one of the top emergencies that's facing the city and the people of the city. I've talked about how I intend to use the Comptroller's powers of audit to review the large development deals that have been announced in recent years, development deals that often accommodate large developers with the promises of both jobs and affordable housing, and years later, often you see very little actually materialize. I will review those announcements, look to see what actually has been delivered in terms of affordable housing units, and to the extent that there is a shortfall, and I do believe that there will be a shortfall in many of those cases, in many of those deals, to put these plans, these development plans on a timetable for delivery of what's been promised, especially when it comes to affordable housing. And over the years in the City Council, I've been very active on tenant issues, on issues of equity for people who rent their homes in this city. And that's why I'm very proud to have the support and endorsement of various tenant groups and activist organizations throughout the city.
I know you both are very familiar with Flushing, Queens. I'm curious, what do you think is a fair rent for a 2-bedroom apartment in Flushing? Mr. Josh, what do you think is fair rent for a 2-bedroom?
Well, it depends on where you are and what kind
Flushing,
of building you are.
Queens.
Yeah, Flushing, Queens. I mean, you have luxury apartments, 2-family,
Give me the
various types. I think the fair rent for a 2-bedroom should be about $1,000, but it's far higher than that, and it's very unfortunate. You have 50% or 40% of the population making less than $50,000. With 2 or 3 kids, how can you even pay that? After taxes, what do they get? This is a horrendous state of affairs. Affordable housing is the most important thing. Working families, hardworking people, underemployed people, unemployed people, they need our support. The city must do as much as they can and walk away from all those luxury apartments and the billion-dollar giveaways. This is their time, people. It is your time. Right? Stand up for your rights.
Mr. Liu, I'm curious, what do you think is a fair rent?
Well,
for a 2-bedroom in Flushing?
in Flushing right now, the rents for 2-bedroom apartments range from $1,800 to $2,200, and that's for a basic 2-bedroom apartment. That is far too expensive for the average family living in Flushing. Flushing is a working class neighborhood, much like Washington Heights, where the woman who asked the question came from. And over the years, it's always been the hard work, the blood, sweat, and tears of immigrants that have built up these neighborhoods that then jack up rents and property values. And we need to do something to prevent the kind of gentrification that destabilizes neighborhoods in New York City.
Okay. We did look up what the average rent is for a two-bedroom in Flushing. You were a little low, Mr. Josh. Mr. Liu, you're a little high. It's $1,450 to $1,900 for a two-bedroom.
No, I told
Just so
you
you
what
know.
it should be.
Okay, well, I'm going to turn now to another issue. And I'm going to start with you, Mr. Liu. This is a story that's been in the news. I'm sure you know about this. New York State Senator from Queens, Hiram Montserrat, has been acquitted of felony assault charges because he slashed his girlfriend's face with a piece of glass, which means that he could very easily keep his job. He was found guilty, as you know, of a lesser misdemeanor charge. So do you think he should be removed from office? What do you think, Mr. Liu?
Again, the court has rendered its decision yesterday with regard to the felony charges. I'm not going to second guess the judge who, my understanding, is very experienced in these very difficult cases. I think Senator Montserrat has been found guilty by the judge for the misdemeanor charge. They say they're going to appeal, so again, I'm not going to interfere with the judicial system as it is available for everybody in the city. I do believe that the state senate has some bigger issues to deal with, and I look forward to them really coming together and working out some of the issues, especially as the governor has just announced some very significant budget cuts, and we need the state senate to be on top of all of those issues.
But aside from allowing the courts to deal with this, what do you think, personally, do you think he should be removed? Should he be held to a higher standard because he holds public office?
I do believe that there's due process for everybody, no matter how horrific, and I do believe the charges against Senator Montserrat were horrific. But nonetheless, there is a judicial process, and I respect the judicial process. As far as you're asking me what my opinion is, again, the Senator Montserrat plans to appeal those charges. And, you know, domestic violence is something that I have fought in and provided resources to fight in my years in the city council. It's a very serious issue, but so is serious the issue of due process.
Mr. Josh?
Yes, domestic violence is despicable. It should be condemned in every possible manner, whether it's a senator or whoever. My wife, because of that, has chaired the Domestic Harmony Committee we established to help the poor immigrants in Long Island. She's done a terrific job, for which I applaud her. This is the important thing. Women, especially those who migrated or first generation, are treated very badly, and they have to stand up with their husbands. They take all sorts of abuse. I condemn it, I abhor it, I'm shocked that a man of Mr. Montserrat's stature would do such a thing.
Condemn it, but do you think he should be removed from office?
I wasn't there when it took place. As Lou very eloquently pointed out, it's the judicial process has taken its place, and that's where we leave it at.
Well, I want to, as Mr. Ijaz did, totally condemn domestic violence because it is a scourge, even more so in the immigrant community.
Okay, gentlemen. Our next question comes from Dave Evans, and David begins with Mr. Ijaz.
Mr. Ijaz, before we get to the question, let's go ahead and listen to another voter. This voter has a question about the subway and is from Staten Island.
They keep raising this fares for MTA. When is the service going to improve? They take away the service and raise the fares?
Now, if elected Comptroller, how would you make sure that New Yorkers are getting their money's worth out of the MTA? And also, Mr. Liu mentioned this new budget or these recommendations from the governor. There is the clear possibility now that because of the cutbacks that the MTA could be facing, about $118 million less, we could see another fare hike.
Okay, this is the typical government in action. Incompetence, inefficient, and I repeat the word, incompetence. There is so much fat in the MTA. It is incredible. There has never been a proper operational audit done of the MTA and the Transit Authority. It should have been done a long time ago. I applaud John Liu for raising the issue in one of his previous debates. That's where the waste is. Hundreds of millions of dollars can be saved if a proper operational audit is done, if proper people like me who have years of experience in it can do it. I worked for Nassau County as a director for 12 years. I exposed waste and losses of $500 million. I've done that, and I know if I were to audit them, I'll find hundreds of millions of dollars, and there'll be no need to raise any fares, none whatsoever.
Mr. Liu?
The MTA faces extreme deficits. Some of the problems, a lot of the problems were due to mismanagement at the MTA level. Some of it due to the economy, the decline in the economy. As Comptroller, I will continue to build on my record as chairperson of the City Council's Transportation Committee, where for the last 8 years I have pointed out a series of lapses in management, a series of financial discrepancies that the MTA has presented to the public to the detriment of its own credibility in a time when we need the MTA more than ever before. The fact of the matter is that they are going to face difficult deficits, and as was presented earlier this year, where they did receive a bailout by state government, particularly through the payroll tax, I will immediately, if I am elected to the Comptroller's position, review the MTA's finances and what they have actually done with regard to the bailout package they received just earlier this year.
Okay. Next question is from Mariela.
This goes to Mr. Liu. Mr. Liu, you have the support of most major city unions. I've seen you campaigning with them all the time in Washington Heights and everywhere. But as we face this economy and the crisis, how can we make sure and trust you that you will also take a look at the taxpayers' interest and not only the union members who tend to demand higher salaries and more benefits in their pension plans? How can you find a fair balance?
Thank you very much for that question. In my campaign, I have left no stone unturned. I have gone through all 5 boroughs, to every neighborhood, to every community. I've sought the support of labor unions, of business groups, of community advocates, of elected officials, of political clubs. And along the way, I'm proud, I'm honored that many of them have joined my campaign, and I was very proud to have won the Democratic nomination to become the next Comptroller. The unions are an important part of the city. I certainly was very happy to get their support, as all of my rivals in the Democratic primary sought their support as well. And the fact of the matter is that I presented a very objective view of what I would do as Comptroller. And to the extent that they agreed with me, they came on board. To the extent that some of the unions did not agree with me, they did not support me. The fact of the matter is, when I am Comptroller, I will be entirely objective, especially when difficult decisions will need to be made between the City Council and the Mayor in the months to come.
Objective, but are you willing to ask unions for cuts?
Absolutely. The fact of the matter is, I've also talked about how there is a very difficult situation that we as a city need to come together. And through the collective bargaining process and involving everybody who has a stake in the future of our city, we will come up with solutions. I've talked about how earlier this summer, in June or July, the mayor came up to an agreement with the United Federation of Teachers where everybody understood that there was a difficult problem to grasp. Earlier in May or June, the governor came to an agreement with the CSEA, the Public Employees Union at the state level, and they again came to terms with an agreement that allowed the state to move forward on a more sound financial basis.
Mr. Ijaz?
You know, I hate to be the person who keeps harping on the same issue. Incompetence, inefficiency. Union bashing has gone on for way too long. The union people do not make billions of dollars or millions of dollars. If the city wasn't giving away billions of dollars to the super rich, it wouldn't be in that situation. They can't even manage $120 billion, and they lost $30 billion. Now they want to go after the height of the poor union workers, the hardworking people, the working family, the union people. They do not make billions of dollars or millions of dollars. Look, go after the banks. We give them, Federal Reserve gives them loans at 0%, and they go around and charge the hardworking people 30% interest. This is this is horrendous. This is disgusting. You listen, $50,000, $60,000 for the poor union people. How on earth are they even surviving right now? And you try to cut more money off them? There should be support. Productivity enhancement can save hundreds of millions of dollars. I have the plan, and I'll prove it to you.
Okay, well, you're talking about the rich. Our next question kind of talks about Wall Street. You saw in the news, both of you gentlemen, this past week, that the Dow reached 10,000 for the first time in a year. And there's also the article that Goldman Sachs is probably this year going to be handing out record bonuses. So I'm curious as what you think the impact of this Wall Street recovery is going to have on the city's finances in the next few months ahead. Mr. Ijaz, I'm beginning with you.
Yes, I'm glad you asked me the question. This is so shameful, it is amazing. Again, as I said, Federal Reserve gives these banks zero interest loans at 0% interest. They come back, charge the consumers, and especially the poor credit card holders and those in the working class who are holding about $1 trillion of these credit card debt. 30%, they miss their payment by one day, they $50 charge, $100 charge here. Those poor people who cannot afford to pay off the loan and just make the minimum payment, they will never be able to pay off their loans. They'll be slaves to the banks eternally. They do not even realize that. Listen, we have a plan. We'll work with you. We will do something. Go to my website, salijaz.com. We'll organize a march to all these banks. We'll make sure that these horrendous charges no longer exist.
Okay. The question here, though, is really about how this is going to impact New York City's finances. So, Mr. Liu.
Well, let me state that I still am very disturbed about how large corporate entities can get federal financial assistance and then a short time later hand out these tremendous, some people would say obscene bonuses. To answer your question, Diana, the bonuses do help the city's finances. And so it's kind of like a mixed blessing here. On the one hand, yes, the bonuses, the Wall Street bonuses do help the city's finances, the tax revenues that come in that then allow us to provide the services to the rest of New Yorkers. But here again, we have to reduce our dependency on these Wall Street bonuses. For many years, Wall Street was flush. And I think the administration of this city kind of fell asleep with regard to economic development in all 5 boroughs. We need to make sure that we have a long-term economic strategy that reduces our overdependence on Wall Street and Goldman Sachs bonuses.
Okay. Our next question comes from Dave Evans. Dave?
Mr. Liu, your friend Bill de Blasio, who's the Democratic candidate for public advocate, he has made the decision to not accept public matching funds. Why haven't you done the same?
I've made very clear that I certainly do not intend to take any public matching funds for the general election, assuming that neither of my opponents, and I do have at least two opponents in this general election, assuming that they do not also get a windfall from the Campaign Finance Board.
Mr. Jaj?
I don't think I'll even make it to the threshold. But if I do, I'll be more than happy to accept it. I'm a grassroots candidate, and this is the city's good program, which I endorse, that gives an opportunity for us who do not have, receive, as I said, legal bribes or get millions of dollars from the major contributors, special interest groups. No, we are not bound by them. We are not a slave to any of these special interest groups. We are not part of the machine. We are working for you, the hardworking people, the unions, the unemployed, the underemployed. Here is your chance to elect someone who will work for you and make sure that there never is any tax increase, never any job layoffs, nor service cuts. The children, the youth, the women, the elderly will all be protected.
Okay, Mr. Jaz.
So if Mr. Jaz or none of our opponents reach the threshold, I certainly will not be using any kinds of public matching funds in the general election.
Okay. Our next question is from Mariela.
Mr. Ijas, Bronx Borough President Ruben Diaz Jr. voted no to the Kingsbridge Armory reconstruction project, which basically would change the area completely, revitalize it, and transform it into a major retail outlet. But he thinks the project would not generate enough good-paying jobs and would actually affect the small business. Many of those jobs, however, would go to the immigration community, to Hispanics who hold jobs in construction. Do you think, as Comptroller, you would be in favor of a project like this, even if it hurts small business?
Absolutely. Any project that helps the poor, the working class, I'm for it, especially in depressed areas like that. I walked there. We walked in Brooklyn, in Harlem, and in Queens, and I know in the Bronx, and I know how bad the situation is. Block after block, you see signs of poverty. And it is very disturbing because you just come a few miles away and suddenly it's a different city altogether. This is not the way New York City is. This is the greatest city in the world. 8 million people. Everybody should participate in the prosperity. It's 40, 50% of the people are just left out in the dark. That's not the way it should be. We should change this situation. Every project that brings in jobs should be encouraged.
But Mr. Ijas, small businesses are also working class, and they've held these counties in this economy, and this could hurt them. What do you say to them?
I'm sure if any such proposal that brings in jobs can be properly structured, the small businesses can be accommodated. I'm not there to give you the exact details, but I'm sure, as the Comptroller, I'll ensure that both the parties are, their requirements are met and the projects goes on and more jobs are created and be helpful for everybody.
Mr. Liu, I'm curious, weigh in on this idea.
As Comptroller, I've talked about how the Economic Development Corporation is one city agency that I would take a powerful microscope to in terms of the deals, in terms of the projects that they manage. And for too long, I do believe that they count the number of jobs that are created in a project, but they don't count the number of jobs that actually get displaced or that the number of small businesses that would be put out by these mega projects. I was particularly impressed by Ruben Diaz Jr., who had actually been borough president for a matter of weeks. And he said no to the administration, no to the EDC, until there was a clear definition of exactly how that project at the Kingsbridge Armory would actually affect the Bronx Borough and the surrounding community. That's the kind of thoughtful analysis we need to collaboratively undertake in order to ensure that these large development projects actually benefit the people, the communities, and the city's taxpayers as a whole.
So am I hearing you say that you agree with his no vote?
I don't think it was a no vote. I think the borough president's position.
It was the reconstruction project.
Well, the borough president was talking about how the deal needs to, the arrangement, the agreement needs to include more understanding and also benefits for the residents and also for the small businesses.
But because it was never reached to that agreement, he voted no to it.
Well, that's true, but that certainly is not the end of the line for this particular project.
So your answer would be to continue negotiating until
Absolutely.
you can get a fair share for everybody.
That's
Okay.
correct.
Okay. Okay, our next question, and this involves the deficit. The city deficit for the next year, $5 billion projected. If the city, gentlemen, has no choice but to raise taxes, I want you to name for me which tax you would support raising. And I know this is always difficult for candidates to do, but give me a specific tax. And Mr. Liu, I begin with you on this one.
Well, you may recall during the Democratic primary, I was the only candidate who was willing to speak the truth about this issue and the fact that with a $5 billion deficit looming, that there's no way to simply cut our way out of this, but that there would need to be a combination of expense reductions as well as revenue enhancers in order to bridge this deficit. And I was also really the most honest candidate to talk about how it's time that we had a more progressive rate of income tax in this city where we don't continue the system that exists now where school teachers pay the same marginal tax rate as billionaires in this city. That a more progressive system would allow us to generate significant amounts of revenue that wouldn't be necessary to bridge this enormous budget deficit.
So you would raise the city income tax?
I would make it more progressive and tax the highest paid levels, highest paid residents of this city.
Okay, Mr. Jaj, what specific
Okay,
tax
I have
would you
a
take a
totally
look at?
different take on it. There is no such thing as progressive. When they were slamming down the throat $1 billion of sales tax, and now they're being so holy and say, gee, we should make sure that the rich pay their due share. Sales tax of $1 billion hurt the poor people 15 times more than it hurt the rich people. Where were they? Where were their all the compassion that they're showing now? Here is this thing. No taxes, no more taxes for the poor people.
But the question is, if you have to raise a tax.
I was coming to it.
Okay.
No more taxes for the poor. There are so many alternative ways of raising money. One, reduce the fat. I have ideas where we can cut down several $100 million without hurting anybody. Medicaid is one area they've never even touched. I've never found any credit audit reports.
We've heard that, but what specific tax, if you have to raise a tax, would you raise?
Absolutely. Income tax, but at a higher level.
So you're saying the exact same thing as Mr. Liu?
It is not starting at a lower level at all. It is. Progressive means it starts from the bottom up. No, it starts at a higher level.
You would just do a...
Yes.
Okay. I will.
Well, what I mean by the progressive rate is that right now, our income tax rates in the city top out at about $80,000 of income, and hence a school teacher pays the same marginal tax rate as a billionaire does. What I suggest is that, for example, people who make $500,000 or more pay a little bit more.
A millionaire's tax, essentially.
That's right, and certainly
we want to get a few more questions in here, and I do have to tell you, because I'm looking at the clock here and we're kind of winding down on time, we're going to keep now responses down to about 45 seconds if we could. And Dave, you have the next question.
Mr. Ijaz, your party, which has an unusual name, Rent is Too High, has officially endorsed your opponent, John Liu. What does that say about your candidacy, if it's endorsed him, not you?
Yes, you're absolutely right. And he is quite ecstatic about it, which is fine. Because of personal differences, I moved away from the party. But it's not to say that we do not support the agenda of not the party, but agenda of everybody. This is your chance to elect someone who will work for you. My agenda is your agenda. I'm not a professional politician with a self-serving agenda who will be using this position as a stepping stone to move on to the others. I've never taken a dime from any special interest. I'm not a machine person. I'm not subservient to anybody. I'll be working for you, and that's the way it should be. The rent is too high.
And we giggle at that because actually the name of the party is The Rent is Too Damn High, right? That is the accurate name of the party. Okay, and Mr. Liu, I'm going to let you respond to this endorsement that you got from this party.
Well, I'm not sure what happened with Mr. Ijaz and his party. I have not had any contact with this party. I've had no contact. But I will say I do also believe that the rent is too darn high.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mariella has the next question.
Mr. Liu, the last time I saw you, you were campaigning in the 10th District in Washington Heights, and you told me personally that you were going to have an important meeting with the president of the Association of Bodegueros and Assemblyman Adriano Espaillat to discuss immediate solutions to their problems accessing credit from banks, etc. Have you had that meeting yet? Can you give us an update on that?
Well, I am going to have that meeting as soon as I take office if I am successful on November 3rd. But I've also attended a number of meetings in Washington Heights with small business owners, with the Bodega Owners Association, with a more immediate problem that exists right now for small businesses throughout the city. And that is that when they come for lease renewals on their stores, that they often are asked many times what they've been paying in recent years.
But that's been going on for many years. I mean, what can you actually do to help them on that?
Well, in the City Council, I am one of the active sponsors of a bill that would create some kind of a mediation process between small business tenants and the large landlords that often are asking them for much higher rents. There needs to be a more level playing field.
And under the table, they're asking for the money under the table.
And you may recall in June I was at a hearing in the City Council where I questioned the Small Business Services Department as well as the Economic Development Corporation as to what extent does the city understand that this under the table money is being forced upon small business owners, and all they could say was that they needed proof of that.
Mr.
Everybody
Josh,
knows it happens.
Okay, I want to give you some time here. I see you shaking your head over there.
Yes, indeed. You see, this is again, if the city had worked and had played their cards right and made sure that there was affordable housing, there were business development, economic zones established, and they put in billions of dollars instead of giving billions of dollars to the super rich or the rich developers, this situation would never have been there. For everywhere you go, there's overcrowding. People, because of the gentrification, people are being pushed into smaller and smaller pockets, and they are being literally squished. This is unfair. This is horrendous. This shouldn't be allowed.
Okay. I'm going to ask a couple of quick questions here because we're almost out of time. But I'm curious, what's your personal spending weakness? Mr. Liu, what's your personal spending weakness?
Well, I've got an 8-year-old. And as much as I try to impose fiscal discipline on this kid, when he wants something, it's sometimes hard to resist.
Toys?
Toys, actually Joey asks for books when I encourage him to just get it from the library.
Mr. Josh, your personal spending?
Yeah, books primarily. I mean, I'm an avid reader and I'm a golfer and I spend a lot of money on golf, and I'm also a great tennis player, so that's that too. Those are the 3 areas where I spend most of my money.
And we've asked this before. Mr. Liu, if you win, will you run for mayor eventually?
If I win, I intend to be the best comptroller the city has ever had, and then
That doesn't surprise me, that response, Mr. Ijaz. If you were to win, would you be willing to run for mayor?
One
Very
term,
quickly, yes or no?
one term, just one term, working for the people.
Okay. We are out of time, gentlemen, but we do have your closing comments. So that does do it for questions from all of us, and the candidates will now have 1 minute each to make their closing statements, and we begin with John Liu.
Well, thank you very much. I want to thank you, Diana, Dave, and Mariella for putting this debate on once again for the people of New York City. I want to thank my opponent for being here with me to talk about the issues. The fact of the matter is, as I've said over and over again this year during this campaign, that we have a very difficult problem in this city. It's a looming budget deficit. It's people out of work, in some cases losing their homes. It's a difficult economic climate, and that's why I'm running for comptroller. I want to combine my deep understanding of city government, what it can and should be doing for people, along with my professional background in finance from the private sector, and use this to overhaul the contracting process in the city to ensure that more businesses, particularly minority and women-owned businesses, have a fair shake, to audit the agencies, to root out the waste, especially when we see budget cuts affecting senior citizens, affecting school kids. We have to put the city on sound financial footing, and that is why I'm running for city comptroller.
Salim Ijaz.
It is for the first time, I think, that the comptroller candidate has brought to the table the requisite qualifications and experience. I'm a CPA, 40 years of experience, a record of exposing waste and losses of $500 million. I'll be productive from the day one. I'm the only one who will present plans, and in fact, I've already issued a proposal to save $100 million. I'm standing here, and I'm guaranteeing you that I'll save hundreds of millions of dollars. No tax increase for the working family, for the poor, never. There'll be no job layoffs, no cuts in all the essential services, firefighters, policemen, nothing, never. Elderly will be protected, everybody will be protected. The 30% rate is horrendous, we'll fight it. Go to my website, salijaz.com. You'll see that we'll be organizing marches against these horrendous behavior of these big banks who we fund, we save them, and we give them interest at 0%.
Okay, thank you both, gentlemen. And that wraps up our debate for New York City Comptroller. We want to thank all of our partners.